All right, so today we're going deep on a guy, pretty famous, Jesse James. But we're going beyond the gunslinger thing, right? Like trying to get to the real story.
Yeah, and that's what makes this one so interesting to me, I think.
For sure.
We have this great book we're looking at, um, Jesse James, The Last Rebel of the Civil War. It's by T.J. Stiles.
Right, right. So basically, like, what we're trying to do here is figure out, like, was this guy just in it for himself?
Mm.
Money and all that? Or was there, like, something else going on?
Yeah, was there more to it?
Yeah. Something about how things were after the Civil War, all the turmoil in politics and all that.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't separate Jesse James from the history, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
It's all tied together.
Okay, so let's unpack this. So Stiles talks about Jesse James being born in 1847. It's an area called Little Dixie, Missouri. And it was settled by, well, slave owners, right, from the South.
Yeah, farmers from southern states, yeah.
So what was life like in Little Dixie back then, before the war?
Well, Little Dixie wasn't just like a nickname,
Right.
It was about the economics and the politics of the place, They
really?
brought their way of life with them, Not just the farming, but also like their beliefs
Totally.
about slavery, states' rights, all that. And it was bound to, cause tension
Yeah.
with folks who didn't agree.
Right, the abolitionists and all that.
That exactly. A real powder keg.
And the James family, they were like right in the middle of all that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they were wealthy,
Right.
owned a good number of enslaved people, more than they had family members, actually.
Wow.
So that tells you something, right?
Yeah, yeah. But they weren't just like sitting back, were they?
Oh, no, no, no. Stiles makes it clear they were active
Okay.
in those pro-slavery groups.
That's which ones?
Even the border ruffians, the ones that were, terrorizing anti-slavery folks in Kansas.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't just about the money for them, It was about, like, ideology. They were willing to fight, even kill for their way of life.
Yeah, wow. It's hard to imagine how divided things were.
Right. And then, boom, the war starts.
Yeah.
Missouri's right in the middle of it. And it wasn't just armies fighting each other,
Right.
It was neighbor against neighbor.
Jeez.
Brutal.
So, like, for the James family, this wasn't just something they were reading about.
No, they lived it. Frank James, the older brother, he joined the Confederate Army right away.
Okay.
And then Jesse, just 16 years old at the time,
16, wow.
follows his brother right into the war.
It's hard to, like, wrap your head around that.
It is. It is. And this is where it gets even more interesting. He doesn't just join the regular army.
Right.
He joins up with these, what they call bushwhackers.
Oh, yeah?
A guerrilla force
Yeah.
outside the normal military stuff.
So what does that mean, like, in terms of what they were doing?
It means brutal, irregular warfare,
Okay.
They weren't just fighting soldiers. They were targeting civilians, anyone they suspected of being pro-union.
Wow.
Think about that. You're a teenager, killing people you might have known your whole life.
Yeah.
Fueled by this mix of ideology and revenge.
It's intense. And Stiles mentions this group led by Bloody Bill Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this guy was notorious.
Oh, yeah. He wouldn't just kill prisoners, he would mutilate them.
Jeez.
So that gives you a sense of, the kind of environment we're talking about here.
Chilling, honestly. And what about Jesse's family?
Well, Stiles says that his mother, she was actually proud of her sons.
Really?
She would even pray for their success,
Wow.
It really gives you a picture of the mindset, right?
Yeah.
How deeply these beliefs ran.
So the war ends. Jesse James is 18. He's seen a lot, done a lot.
Right.
What happens next?
Well, the war might be over, but for Jesse James, the fighting, it doesn't stop. And this is where things get really blurry,
So-
like where does personal revenge end and this political agenda begin?
Okay.
Missouri goes through Reconstruction, but, well, it's complicated. Stiles calls it a Reconstruction within a Reconstruction.
What does that even mean?
Well, you have a lot of former Confederates, right? They can't vote,
Right.
and they feel like they're being punished unfairly, and
Yeah.
that leads to a lot of anger, a lot of unrest.
So, like, how does all this post-war stuff shape Jesse James? I mean, he goes from soldier to outlaw.
Right. Well, it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have, the personal stuff. Jesse and his buddies want revenge
Right.
for what happened during the war.
Sure.
But it's bigger than that.
Right.
They see themselves as fighting against, like, the new order,
Okay.
the Republicans who are in charge now.
So they're still, like, fighting the lost cause.
Exactly, even though the war is over.
And so This leads to, a bunch of violent stuff, like what? Targeting Republicans, northern businessmen, that kind of thing?
Like a continuation of the war.
You could say that. Yeah.
This is like what leads to the first bank robbery.
Right. In 1866, Jesse and some of his old Confederate buddies,
Yeah,
including this guy Archie Clement,
right.
they robbed the Clay County Savings Association.
Okay, but why that bank specifically?
Oh, it wasn't random.
Right.
The bank was owned by some big-time Republicans,
Okay.
former Union officers, too.
So it wasn't just about the money.
No, this was a statement
Okay.
attacking the new power structure.
Yeah. Right, right. It's not just a robbery.
Exactly. And for Jesse James, it's a turning point.
Yeah.
He's officially an outlaw now,
Wow.
a symbol of defiance against, everything that's changed.
And this is where things get even more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we're going to have to save that for next time. Definitely. There's a lot more to uncover. So, Jesse James, the outlaw, right. But how did he become like a legend?
Yeah, good question.
This is where this guy, John Newman Edwards, comes in, a newspaper editor.
Oh, yeah, Edwards. He was like a Confederate officer, right, during the war?
Yep, former Confederate. And he, like a lot of those guys, he really hated the Republicans.
Right. They were running Missouri at that time, right?
Exactly. And Edwards, he saw Jesse James not just as some criminal, but as like a symbol,
Symbol of what?
of like resistance, someone who could, fight back against the Republicans.
So like championing the lost cause.
Exactly.
Okay, so how did they actually work together, James and Edwards?
Well, Edwards had this newspaper, right, the Kansas City Times.
Right.
And he used it to like create this whole narrative around Jesse James.
Okay.
He made him out to be this Robin Hood type figure,
Oh, interesting.
the noble outlaw fighting against the corrupt North.
So he was spinning it right, like creating a myth.
Yeah, you could say that.
Right.
But it was a myth that like a lot of people in Missouri really bought into.
Yeah, especially the folks who felt like, screwed over by the new government.
Exactly. Edwards, he knew how to tap into that, that resentment. And he used Jesse James to give it a voice.
Clever.
Yeah. And the James gang, they played their part too, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like their robberies, they weren't just random, were they?
No, not at all. They would often target like institutions or people, associated with the Union or the Republican Party.
It was almost like performance art or something, right?
You could say that. Political theater.
It's amazing how they understood like the power of symbolism.
Yeah, and Edwards, he knew exactly how to use that. He would like publish these detailed accounts of the robberies in his paper.
Oh, wow.
Emphasizing how daring and skilled the gang was and kind of downplaying the violence.
Right. And, there's that one incident at the Kansas City Fair in 1872.
Yeah.
They rode right in, guns blazing, robbed the ticket booth. What do you think the message was there?
Well, it was right before the presidential election, right?
Yeah.
And Grant was running for re-election. He was seen as like the guy behind Reconstruction, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of former Confederates really hated him. So this robbery, it was a direct challenge to Grant and his whole administration.
Like, we're still here.
Exactly. And Edwards, he went nuts. He wrote this editorial praising the robbers as like heroes.
Wow.
And contrasting them with, the corruption of Grant's government.
Oh.
He even called them bold robbers. Like, yeah, they're outside the law, but they're not, evil.
That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And wasn't there something about, like, Jesse James wrote a letter to the paper, too?
Oh, yeah. He denied being involved.
Of course.
But then he went on to say, there's a difference between bold robbers and skulking thieves, like Grant and his buddies.
Oh.
And he even claimed they robbed from the rich to give to the poor, which, who knows if that's true?
Probably not.
Probably not. But it fit that Robin Hood image perfectly, right?
Totally.
And let's not forget, like, other things they did.
Like what?
That first train robbery in 1873, they were wearing, like, Ku Klux Klan robes.
Oh, wow.
Adding that whole layer of, like, intimidation, the racial stuff.
So it's complicated, right?
It is.
On the one hand, you have this image of the outlaw fighting for the little guy.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's, real violence, intimidation.
And that's what makes this whole story so interesting, I think.
For sure. But, like, I'm curious, did it work?
Did what work?
Like, all this, robbing and the symbolism, did it actually change anything politically?
Well, it's tough to say. They definitely created a lot of, fear, unrest in Missouri, and they gave like a rallying point for folks who hated Reconstruction. But in the end, Reconstruction ended. The Democrats got back in power. And Jesse James, well, he was still an outlaw.
So last time we were talking about how things were changing, right?
Yeah.
For the James Younger gang,
Yeah.
like politically.
Right. Reconstruction ending.
Right. The Democrats back in charge of Missouri and all that. So what happened to the gang? Like, how did they adapt, I guess?
It's interesting, you know, how the politics really affected them. Like, there's this raid they did, the Northfield raid,
Oh, yeah, in Minnesota.
1876.
Right.
Super bold move, you know, way outside their usual territory.
Yeah, why'd they go all the way up there?
Some think they were after a specific guy
Okay.
connected to the Republicans, maybe, but it was a total disaster.
Yeah, it didn't go well, did it?
Couple gang members got killed.
Right.
The rest got scattered.
But Jesse and Frank escaped.
Yeah. And when Jesse shows up again, it's like 1879, new crew. And the robberies, they kind of lose that political angle.
Really?
Yeah, seems more about just, you know, getting the money.
So, like, without that cause, without the whole fighting the system thing, Jesse James is just, what, another outlaw?
Kind of, yeah. It's still dangerous, obviously, but not that symbol of, you know, Confederate defiance anymore. And honestly, I think losing that sense of purpose of, like, having an enemy, I think it messed him up.
You mean, like, led to his death?
Well, yeah. By 1882, he was a problem for the governor.
New governor.
Yeah. Former Confederate general, actually.
Oh, wow.
But he was also trying to, like, clean up Missouri's image, you know, make it respectable again.
Sure.
And Jesse James, with his, you know, reputation, was bad for business.
So what'd he do?
Made a deal with two of Jesse's own guys,
No way.
the Ford brothers.
Oh, right.
Pardon and a reward if they took care of Jesse.
Wow, that's cold.
It was. Shot him in the back of the head
Jeez.
in his own house, unarmed.
Man, that's brutal.
Yeah. Real cowardly. But I guess it shows you how things were changing, right?
Yeah, like loyalties shifting.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I don't know, a Greek tragedy or something. This guy who fought the law, brought down by his own men, and it's the very system he hated that gets him in the end.
Yeah, it really is.
So what happened to everyone after Jesse James died?
Well, Frank James, even with, you know, all the stuff he did, he got acquitted.
Seriously, yeah.
Yeah. Probably some political pressure, maybe even jury tampering, who knows.
So much for justice.
Right. And Edwards, the newspaper guy, he kept writing, but it wasn't the same. He died a few years later.
What about the Ford brothers? They they killed Jesse James. Did it work out for them?
Not really. They tried to cash in on it, you know, even did a stage show reenacting the whole thing. But I don't think they ever escaped what they did. Bob Ford, the one who actually pulled the trigger, he got killed later.
Oh, wow.
Some guy who wanted to be known as like the guy who killed Jesse James.
Wow, talk about twisted.
Yeah, it really makes you think about, you know, why we're so fascinated by outlaws, by these guys who live outside the rules.
For sure. But beyond that, like, what can we learn from Jesse James? His life, his death, all of it.
Well, I think it shows us that history isn't simple.
Yeah.
You know, people are shaped by what's happening around them, politics, society, all that.
Right.
And sometimes that can push people to do extreme things.
It makes you wonder, like, if the South had won the war, would Jesse James be a hero, instead of an outlaw?
Yeah, that's a good question. Makes you think about who writes the history books. Right?
For sure.
And it reminds us to, look beyond the simple stories, the good guys and bad guys, all that. History is more complicated than that.
Yeah. And maybe that's the real legacy of Jesse James. He makes us ask the tough questions.
Yeah, he does.
Look at the gray areas and realize that there's, always more to the story.
Absolutely. And that's why I think we're still talking about him today.
Well said. Hey, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life and times of Jesse James. We'll be back next time with another great story. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those minds sharp.